Welcome back. You're still tuned in to News and Views with myself, Salailo Makwidiri. We're still continuing with our hashtag Africa Focus feature. This is a part of the show where we look at some of the biggest and most pressing topics, stories doing the rounds on the African continent. And this time around, we'll be shifting our attention to the Horn of Africa, where a diplomatic development is quietly sending shockwaves through the region and beyond. Israel's recognition of Somaliland, a self-declared state that broke away from Somalia more than 3 decades ago, but remains internationally unrecognized by a lot of countries, has raised serious questions about regional stability, about international law, African sovereignty, and just geopolitical alignment. Is this a long overdue acknowledgement of political reality, or is it a risk of destabilizing an already fragile region? And is there a much more sinister, let's say, agenda by Israel on the African continent? We saw in the latter part of last year Israeli leaders visiting African heads of states and looking to entrench themselves on the continent and, to be frank, try and find friends on the African continent. We'll be unpacking the strategic implications of the recognition of Somaliland and what it means for the rest of Africa, and this new Africa agenda by Israel and what it ultimately means for all of us. And we'll be doing that with Faisal Ali. He's a journalist at The Guardian and also contributing editor at Jessica, and is also with Al Jazeera English. Faisal, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to News and Views. Really appreciate you giving us your time.
Good morning, Salil. How's it going? Good to be with you.
Most definitely. And I think we'll jump right into it. We can start with the fundamentals. What exactly has Israel done when it comes to recognizing Somaliland, and why is this move considered so significant, not just for Somalia, but for Israel and for the entire Horn of Africa?
So I'll probably start by saying that recognition of any political entity anywhere in the world is a decision made by executive bodies of governments. And so you're not necessarily bound to follow the UN system of officially recognized states, which are part of the global international organization. There are many examples of countries which are recognized by, this state or that state, but aren't necessarily recognized by another. For example, Kosovo, probably the most prominent one. And then for a long time, Taiwan was another example of a country which slowly but steadily, obviously, more countries decided to do business with Beijing, a much more powerful and wealthier state. But that slowly and gradually became the case over the course of the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, as Beijing lobbied for people not to recognize Taiwan. In terms of Israel and Somaliland, the decision Israel has made is basically it isn't to de-recognize Somalia first and foremost, it's just to recognize that it wants to have full diplomatic ties, including at the ambassador level with Somaliland. The reason why this breaks with international conventions is because usually, obviously, if you have a kind of state which is part of the UN system, you must, according to kind of the rules of the game, recognize the territorial integrity and sovereignty of that. It would be like Somalia recognizing, Scotland as an independent state, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So for Somali officials, obviously, this is a great danger. They're furious, as you can imagine. They've mobilized a great amount of diplomatic support in Africa, in the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. They've been lobbying the European Union and other governments around the world. The Russians and the Chinese have made quite strong statements. And the US has come out as well, crucially, and said they don't support, it's not that they don't support Israel's move, they just won't be following it. They didn't condemn it in the same language, of course, that some of Somalia's closer relations, countries with which it has closer relations, have done so.
Most definitely. And I want to focus on that and how, this recognition could further inflame tensions with Mogadishu and also weaken Somalia's sovereignty. And I think most concerning, complicate peace and state building efforts. From your analysis, how real are those risks, and where might the pressure points emerge first?
In terms of Somalia's territorial integrity and its sovereignty, I think two things can simultaneously be true. Of course, in legal terms, Somaliland remains a part of Somalia. But as you were saying in the introduction, Salelo, for about 34 years, Somaliland has been operating separately from Somalia. It has its own constitution. It has a parliament, a currency. It has an army. And a lot of Somalilanders identify as having a distinct political identity from the rest of Somalia. And so in some ways, there is a truth to what Israeli officials have been saying, and that they've recognized the reality which was on the ground in the first place. In terms of the broader security picture for the Somali government, the Somali president has described this as the gravest threat to the territorial integrity of Somalia. I think what he's worried about is the possibility that other countries could follow Israel's lead. And of course, as a country which has a great amount of diplomatic clout, and kind of great lobbying institutions in London and DC, Paris, and elsewhere in the Western world, there was a concern in the Somali capital that Israel might start pushing or encouraging other countries to take similar steps. From a security standpoint, Somalia domestically is facing an armed insurgency from a local Al-Qaeda affiliate called Al-Shabaab, which has been fighting since 2007, roughly. And that group is considered by the US the wealthiest and most powerful local Al-Qaeda affiliate across Africa. And one of the things the Somali government has been warning about is that this provides them with a diplomatic propaganda coup, in the sense that they can say that we're vindicated in what we've been telling you guys about all of the dangers that everybody poses to our country around the world. And on more than one occasion now, some of their spokespeople have made statements saying that they are prepared now to carry out attacks against Somaliland if Israel has a physical presence in the territory. In addition to that, Salelo, I'd say that the Houthis, who are just across the Gulf of Aden from Somaliland, have also issued a statement in which they've said any Israeli presence in Somaliland would be considered a threat to them, and that they would consider that a legitimate target from their perspective. And so, I mean, I can explain some of the backstory, of course, but I think some of your listeners will be aware of the issues that Israel and the Houthis have had with each other. The Houthis have been firing rockets and implementing a naval blockade in the Gulf of Aden/Red Sea on Israeli-linked ships, and that has had a kind of negative impact both on Israeli security and also on the Israeli economy. Ports have closed down and other kinds of things, and so it provides them with an opportunity, the Israelis, to be directly across from the Houthis, of course, if they're granted a base or anything like that. But from a Somali perspective, it drags the country into Israel's Middle East conflicts. And as a country which has been emerging from a 30-year war, which is very poor, a large displaced population, the Somali president has said himself in the Somali parliament that this is not something that we want to necessarily get involved in this kind of way.
Most definitely. And I think you just, encroach on my next question a bit. Just zooming out. No, it's okay. Just zooming out geopolitically. You touched on it just briefly. What exactly does Israel stand to gain here? Is this primarily, as you mentioned, about the Red Sea security, the trade routes, intelligence, regional alliances, or just a broader realignment involving Gulf states and Western powers?
One of the things, Salelo, right from the beginning when this announcement was made, I mean, from my perspective as someone who's been reporting on it from December the 26th, was the opacity around, the nature of what was being agreed. They agreed to establish diplomatic ties. They didn't explain anything about what was being gained. There's been some speculation. The Somali president, for example, said 3 things were part of the deal. He said Somaliland would join the Abraham Accords. That's something that Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has confirmed. The 2 other things that the Somali president said were part of the deal were a military base and the forcible displacement of the population of Gaza to Somaliland. Somaliland's foreign ministry issued a statement about 3 or 4 days ago denying the latter 2, that they would not be receiving forcibly displaced or ethnically cleansed Palestinians from Gaza, and nor would they be permitting, or at present they wouldn't be permitting, an Israeli military base. That wasn't basically part of the agreement. And yesterday, Israel's foreign minister appeared on an Israeli channel, Channel 14, in which he said, he didn't explain what was agreed, unfortunately, but he did say that we wouldn't be forcibly displacing Palestinians over there. I think if we look at if you look at the map, basically, it's not always that the map necessarily tells you the story, but the rationale is obvious. Israel has a formidable regional foe directly across from the Red Sea. Some Somaliland and Israeli analysts and some officials have been suggesting that security cooperation would be a big part of it. Yesterday, or 2 days ago, when Israel's foreign minister visited Somaliland, he was in Hargeisa, engaging in meetings with Somaliland's president. The readout was quite vague, but it did say security was among the things which would be a consideration for them. So whilst I can't say, Salelo, at the present moment for sure this is exactly what's been agreed and this is what we can anticipate, we do have some indications of where things will potentially be going. It will be development, commerce, investment, trade, and security. And if Israeli government officials' assurances are anything to go by, the main concern that people had, that Gazans would be forced off their land, out of their homes, and off their territory, their land, into Somaliland, will not be something that we need to be worried about, kind of in the short term.
How should this be read across the African continent? Are we, should we be concerned about external powers once again shaping African borders and political outcomes, or should there be a sympathy of some sort for Somaliland and their long quest for recognition?
That's a really good question, Salila. I mean, this is the implications of this question are quite huge. And I think despite it, there hasn't been that big a pushback from other African states on this issue. We've seen strong statements, obviously, from Nigeria, from South Africa as well. There were phone calls made between Somalia's president and Tanzania's president, Uganda's president, Kenya's president, in which they expressed support for Somalia's territorial integrity. And we should also probably mention that in the Organization of African Unity's charter, which was the predecessor to the African Union, African states were aware of the fact that their borders were relatively arbitrary and potentially, and they were like embers, basically. They could potentially ruse issues. And so I've been surprised that more hasn't come from the continent. But yesterday, there was a meeting called by the Egyptian Foreign Minister, Badr Abdulati, of the African Peace and Security Council. Several countries took part, including Ethiopia, the DRC, and other countries, in which a very strong statement was made by the council, condemning Israel's move, and then also expressing support for Somalia's territorial integrity. I can imagine there are countries worried about it, but I just think that if there are countries which have remained silent, it probably is to do with the fact that Israel is a very influential country in DC, and Trump has demonstrated that he is quite an arbitrary and unpredictable president. And also some of his behavior over the last 3 to 4 weeks, he's kind of downgraded Africa as a strategic region in this kind of vision. In his national security document, I think there was like 1 or 2 paragraphs, maybe a page at tops, about Africa in a 25-page document, only mainly talking about like minerals and metals and stuff that he wants to kind of extract from the continent. And so if a bad relationship with Israel translates into a bad relationship with the US, I think I can understand or can make sense of why a lot of states are treading a very cautious line on this. If we kind of zoom out a bit more, once again, about 50 odd countries around the world have issued statements in support of Somalia. Some of them are very influential countries like China, Russia, the UK, Sweden, France, and elsewhere. And there have been kind of notable silences. Ethiopia, up until yesterday, had nothing to say about it. And Ethiopia, about a year ago, was working with Somaliland in order to kind of fashion its own kind of recognition for sea access to the Gulf of Aden type deal, which eventually buckled under diplomatic pressure.
Oh, they have it. Al Jazeera digital journalist Faisal Ali coming to us live from Doha. Thank you so much for joining us and giving us time. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure to be with you guys. Take care. Have a good day.
There you go. And with that, we're going to take a quick break and close our hashtag Africa Focus feature. If you missed it, you can head over to our website, www.salamina.com, and you can get the podcast of this conversation and many others that we've had. Going to take a quick break. We'll be with you right after this.